Should you play DMC Devil May Cry in 2024? This is a great question because if you're someone like myself who didn't know that this game even existed, what reason do you have to play it? Back when this released in 2013, the last DMC game we had received was Devil May Cry 4, but Capcom decided to reboot the franchise and take it in a different direction. Thanks to this decision, this DMC game feels completely different from the others while still maintaining some traits that were first established in the previous games. But does this change in direction hurt the game, or does it make it better than the other DMC games that released before it? Let's discuss. When it comes to Devil May Cry, the combat is the main attraction. If you were to ask someone, why do you play DMC? More than likely, they'll tell you it's because the combat is so much fun. Thankfully, if there's one thing that Ninja Theory got right about this game, it's the combat, because the fighting in this title is amazing. At first, it doesn't seem like anything special, but once you get access to more weapons, it really begins to open up. What I thought this game did a great job of was adding in the different weapons over the course of the game, but still giving you enough time in between to actually test them out. For example, if you just got access to the Osiris, which is pretty much a scythe, the game has you kill enemies and created each level with the intention of using that weapon to finish the mission. This gives the player ample opportunity to try the weapon out and get used to how it works. Even more, you have the ability to try out the various combos on the enemies, helping you to figure out how to add them into your normal mix-ups. Over the course of the game, you'll receive 7 weapons, with each of them being accessible by pressing a directional button on your controller. Pressing this will swap one of these out for another, with the only thing being left to do is to actually input the button combination so you can use the weapon. Just like other DMC games, which weapon you like the best is completely dependent on your playstyle and how you like to play the game. Regardless of what weapon you choose to use during the combat, one feature that benefits all the players is the combo upgrade system. You could access this menu from the mission select screen or from Divinity statues, but within the upgrades tab you'll see each weapon you have unlocked, along with the moves you can perform for each of them. Some of these moves are grounded, with others being aerial, but the most important feature is the ability to test these moves out before purchasing. So for every move that you're thinking about purchasing, you have the option to test them out on an opponent and see how it feels to use before deciding to add the move to your arsenal. This doesn't seem like a big deal at first, but when you consider that the combat is at the core of the game, and you actually have to find the upgrades, this ends up being pretty meaningful. Speaking of the upgrades, I mentioned that you have to find them. Throughout each level, there's white orbs which now function as the upgrade orbs, which can be found by destroying these souls that are stuck inside walled surfaces. Most of these are right under your nose, but still out of plain view, as they can be easily missed if you don't check every nook and cranny of the surrounding area. Failing to seek these out and grab these upgrades can make the combat a little more challenging than it needs to be, since you're not utilizing the weapons to their full potential. In terms of how the combat feels, if you played any other DMC game, then you'll be right at home. It's fast and snappy, with it being really easy to perform long combos on virtually any enemy. What I think is stressed more in this title than the others is memorizing the abilities of the weapons and the weaknesses of the enemies. Most of the time during the levels, you're fighting similar enemies over and over, so once you understand what moves they're susceptible to, you can gain the advantage during the fights pretty fast. When you start the game, you can't do a whole lot because you don't have access to that many weapons, but once you have all the weapons at your disposal, it's just a matter of what kind of combos do you want to execute. Even with all the weapons and combos the game gives you, it still forces you to understand how each one works and when to use them. Why, you ask? It's because the enemies themselves can be divided up into 3 categories. Demons that can get killed by any weapon, demons immune to angel attacks, and angels immune to demon attacks. Each of these sound exactly as they are. If the demon can get killed by any weapon, then you can just slice and dice your way through them no problem. Simple stuff. But where it gets a bit trickier are the ones that are immune to angel or demon attacks. During combat, you'll notice that some demons glow red, sticking out of the crowd. When you see these enemies, you can only use your demon weapons against them. Trying to use the rebellion or the angel weapons won't work, as your attacks will just bounce right off them. On the flip side, the angels have a blue color and you have to use the angel weapons against those. But wait, it gets better. As you might have already guessed, the game then proceeds to throw in both demons and angels alongside regular enemies at any time during the combat. So this means that you need to understand what moves to use against what enemy to avoid getting hit by certain demons while you're trying to fight the others. This whole situation just reinforces the fact that you can't spam the attacks over and over because you can't beat the game doing it. It's literally impossible to do so. I thought it was pretty cool to make Dante half demon and half angel this time around, and have that be reflected in the combat was just icing on the cake. If you're able to master both the demon and angel weapons alongside the sword, then you'll become an absolute beast at this combat, to say the least. One change that I wasn't the biggest fan of was the camera system. Devil May Cry 1 through 3 all had camera issues, with that being one of my biggest gripes with all three of those games. Although, 4 seemed to have fixed the majority of those same issues. Even still, I was surprised that this reboot decided to move away from the hard lock system to more of a soft lock. To explain, normally you have a dedicated button that you would hit to lock onto enemies individually. In this game, that feature was removed and replaced with a soft lock, which would have Dante attacking whatever is in front of him or closest to him. Now, compared to the other game's camera systems, this wasn't nearly as bad, but I did find myself constantly hitting the R3 button to lock onto an enemy. Even when I finally realized I couldn't do that, there was times that I was attacking enemies that I didn't want to hit, just because it happened to be right next to me. I played the game on normal, but I can see this being a bigger issue if you're playing the game on a harder mode, because hitting the wrong enemy can leave you open and end up with you dying when you shouldn't have. The camera is easy to get used to, it's just one aspect that was changed that I didn't think needed to be. It's worth mentioning that in the definitive edition of the game, the feature of a manual lock-on function was added, and if I would have known that beforehand, I may have played that instead of the original. Regardless, the combat for Devil May Cry is the shining star of this game, and it's clear right from the opening mission. As I mentioned earlier, there's a bunch of weapons that you have at your disposal, and they're broken up between angels and demons. But what I didn't say is that they each have 2 moves which you're going to be using a lot. The Rebellion, Dante's sword, transforms into a sort of grappling hook that changes abilities depending on if you're using angel or demon weapons. By pressing the right trigger and square, you can use your demon weapon to grab objects and pull them closer to you, giving you the ability to reach certain buildings or platforms. On the other hand, by pressing the left trigger and square, you can use the angel weapon to pull yourself to objects. These can be used in conjunction with the combat as well, but I would argue that their importance lies heavily in the traversal. Many times you're in a place where the buildings are falling apart or are being split into little bits, and you must use these sort of whips and chains depending on which color is attached to the building piece. At first it seems pretty simple, but the game slowly adds in more to make the traversal even more challenging. Not only do you have to time your jumps correctly, you have to know when to use the weapons as well. If you played any DMC game before, then you know of the air hike move, which lets you dash through mid-air, helping you to avoid enemies or reach ledges in the far distance. This was brought back, but implemented differently, as you could still air dash, but it would be through these green circles which would thrust you into the air upon activation. Building off of that, you would then have to zip to another ledge, all while maintaining the same height in the air. When describing it, it doesn't sound that hard, but when actually executing it, you have to be paying attention, as it's very easy to fall mid-jump. That brings me to the one thing that was removed that I wish wasn't, and that's the ability to run. Correct me if I'm wrong, but nowhere in the game does it give you an option to purchase something that allows Dante to perform a full-on sprint. Because of this, moving through place to place felt as if I was running through mud. Dante's sort of jog, if that's what you want to call it, is pretty slow. You go through a lot of linear areas and rooms, and having to jog through them slowed down the overall gameplay experience. There's times where you just get out of hectic combat scenarios where you're faced off against countless waves of enemies and are forced to make a quick getaway, only to have to jog your way out until you reach a grappling platform. In my opinion, this makes no sense, as in DMC 4 all you had to do was hold the analog stick forward, and Nero or Dante would go from a light jog straight into a sprint. I thought of all the things in DMC that would be included, this would be it. To make things even worse, this means you couldn't run away from the enemies during combat either. You were forced to dodge or jump out of the way. Having the ability to sprint would have made this game even faster than it already was and take the traversal to a whole other level. Even still, the way the environments were all manipulated and contorted specifically for this traversal system was really cool. The entire mechanic of zipping across place to place seemed like it was inspired from God of War 3, which had released a couple years prior. In those games, Kratos was constantly using his weapons to pull himself or jump across to another area. It felt as if the devs took that mechanic and gave it their own DMC flair. Nonetheless, if there was a sprint button, this traversal might have been the perfect change up to what we normally receive in the DMC games. One thing I thought this game lacked a bit was the boss fights. Don't get it twisted, the boss fights that are present in the game are so fun and engaging, but I thought the quantity wasn't there. Comparing it to DMC 4, which had more boss fights, this game had long gaps where I found myself wondering when the next fight was going to come. Again, going back to God of War, there's times where after getting an enemy to a certain level of health, an opening will appear somewhere on their body, prompting you to perform an action that will progress the fight. When these moments happened, I was expecting some sort of QTE to appear, but that never was the case. Even still, the small light that signifies the difference between angel and demon will be good enough for you to notice that you need to do something different outside of the normal combat. When you died, whether that be on a boss fight or during the mission leading up to it, you'll restart right from where you left off with full health. This caught me by surprise many times because in the old games, if you died during a mission, you had to start that mission over from the very beginning. A welcome change that made this game a lot easier to get through. If you're struggling against the bosses, you can use the gold orbs to revive yourself and keep the fight going. However, you can only hold 3 of these revives at once, so once you run out of them, it's up to you to get more. In my opinion, even on the hardest difficulty available on a first playthrough, you shouldn't need too many of these, because the bosses are pretty easy to beat. They run through a cycle of attacks that are predictable and easy to see. It's just a matter of timing your dodges correctly and making sure that you stay out of range. These boss fights do a solid job at capping off the missions. I just thought there should have been some more of them overall. In regards to the story, Devil May Cry changes things up while keeping some of the aspects the same. The plot takes place in Limbo City, which is a city controlled by powerful demons that are manipulating humanity. Unlike DMC 1, where Dante is a demon hunter and has his own shop, this version of Dante is younger and hunting demons isn't his main priority. One day a woman named Kat appears and warns him he's in danger, and the rest is history. As the plot is slowly revealed over the missions, Dante learns more about his origins and who he really is. Here's where you see the differences between this story and what we're used to in the original games. The biggest difference being that Dante is not half demon and half human, but rather half demon and half angel instead, with this game depicting Ava as an angel this time around. Virgil is in the game and looks similar to the original, but what's most important is that both Dante and Virgil's personalities are vastly different from the other titles. This is portrayed in the way they speak to each other and work together over the course of the story, because this was definitely not the case in the older games. What I liked about this plot was how the demons were able to take human form, which allowed us to see and interact with the demons that had the appearance of normal humans. So many times the demons that we see look like actual demons, like it's so obvious that they're demons you would have to be blind in order to not see it. I understand this was kind of the case in DMC 4, but in this game, it felt more grounded and real. In DMC 4, the characters seem more imaginary, but in this 2013 reboot, the demons actually felt human and demonic at the same time. Seeing them morph from human to demon was a sight to see, and was great at reminding you that yes, they all look like humans, but they're still in fact terrifying demons that had to be stopped. Unfortunately, the plot itself was kind of forgettable. I'm not sure if it was because of how the story was told or if the characters weren't memorable, but I didn't really start getting hooked into the story until the end. All the stuff that was happening during the earlier missions lacked impact and just felt like we were doing things, but none of them were vastly important, even though they actually were. To make things worse, this game repeated something at the very end that I absolutely did not want to see. Spoiler warning for those who haven't played, but having to fight Virgil again was insane. In total, you fight Virgil like 3 or 4 times throughout this entire series. Unless the whole theme of the series is centered around this feud between Dante and Virgil, I don't understand why this was even included in the game. Say what you want about DMC 2, but one thing that I loved about the game is how you fight a villain that you never heard of, you kill him, and then the story ends. I was so content with killing the villain, and then the devs just throw in the Virgil twist, giving us a fight that was unnecessary. Yes, the fight was fun, as the majority of this game was, but seeing them work together all game long just for all that trust to be thrown out in an instant was disappointing to say the least. Even still, the places you go and events that take place leading up to the ending are memorable at times, but fail to make me care the way the older games did. I know it's the first game in this reboot, but what I think this game suffered from was the lack of a supporting cast, as I didn't like Kat and Virgil as much as Trish, Lady, and the original Virgil from the main series. If the supporting characters were better, maybe I would have enjoyed the story more. This plot isn't bad, I just think it could have been fleshed out more so we could get more emotionally attached to the characters outside of Dante. So this brings me back to the question, should you play DMC Devil May Cry in 2024? That answer is maybe. Overall, this game is good, but when you compare it to the other Devil May Cry games before it, it just feels out of place. The combat by itself is enough to justify the purchase, but when you add in a forgettable story and some questionable gameplay tweaks, it may not be worth purchasing at full price, especially considering the age of this game. If I had to give this game a rating, I would give it an 8, and that's mainly because of the combat. The combat in this game carries and is the only reason I would ever go back and play this. If it wasn't for that, I would have scored this lower. If you can find this game on sale, I would say give it a try. But if it's more than $15, wait for a steeper sale, because there's a chance you may not vibe with the series just because it's different than the other DMC games we've already gotten. I did enjoy my time with this game, but I'm glad Capcom decided to go back to the main universe and continue with that story, because those characters are just too memorable to let go. What did you think of Devil May Cry? Did you like this more than the other games? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out one of my other Devil May Cry reviews right here.